welcome back. I'm the Book Guy, and it is a wonderful day because today we get to talk about kids' books. Some of the smartest, most well-written books are placed on the middle grade shelf and then sadly ignored by much of the book community. But I want to shine a spotlight on this subgenre of fantasy and give it the legitimate respect it deserves. Today's subject is Alcatraz versus the Evil Librarians, written by quite possibly the best-selling fantasy author of our time, Brandon Sanderson. He's written a ton of great books, and these are no exception. This is one of my all-time favorite middle-grade books. I've read them all twice, and I cannot wait to read them again. This is a middle-grade adventure about a boy named Alcatraz, yes, named after a prison, who is part of the kind of magical Smedry family. The Smedrys fight against the evil librarians who want to take over the world. There's magic powers, flying ships, giant robots, talking dinosaurs, and giant crystal swords.
This is a good sword.
Plus, it's full of wacky humour, some very clever plot twists, and some very heavy emotional gut punches. This series has everything. As always, I'm going to review this series, but also kind of pitch it to you, spoiler-free and objective, listing any strengths and weaknesses, and ultimately we're going to see if these books are going to be right for you. The book that you hold in your hand is a lie. It's not middle grade fiction, it wasn't written by Brandon Sanderson, it was written by Alcatraz. The book was written in order to get the word out about their secret organization, because in reality the librarians control the known world. Alcatraz is a foster kid who receives a bag of sand for his 13th birthday. Not the best present, except his present is immediately stolen by evil librarians. Now Alcatraz's long-lost grandpa Smedry has come to rescue him and help him recover his bag of sand before the librarians use it for their own evil purposes. But the Smedrys have their own weapons for this fight. First, there's Bastille, Knight of Crystalia, with her giant crystal sword and her willingness to punch anything that gives her a minor inconvenience. There's Grandpa Smedry, whose magical talent is arriving late for everything.
A wizard is never late.
And Alcatraz's supposed talent is that he breaks things by accident. Surely the world is safe in their hands, right? This series has elements of urban fantasy, so set in the real world, and elements of high fantasy set in another world entirely, and elements of science fiction. Now, you might be thinking that's a lot of genres and content all mashed together, and it absolutely is. But that's the beauty of middle grade fiction. That's why I love it so much, because you can get away with throwing all these wild ideas into one series, and they just fit together.
Oh yeah, it's all coming together.
But let's go through all these world-building styles one by one. So first, it is set in the real world. So there are cars, guns, and the internet, etc. The adventures often take us to real locations and famous monuments, plus places out of history and myth. And like all good urban fantasy, there is a secret society.
A secret society! Yeah.
Of particular note is the fact that Brandon Sanderson is a pen name that Alcatraz uses to tell the truth about the world. There are many jokes at Brandon Sanderson's expense, and all in good taste. As for the high fantasy element, well, check out this map. There are multiple new continents in the world placed where the oceans currently are. The idea is that the world we know is controlled land owned by the librarians, called the Hush Lands, which is just brilliant. I mean, the librarians control the Hush Lands. So good. But they hide the existence of the free nations. In these other countries, the free kingdoms, we have talking dinosaurs, crystal swords, magic, and whole cultures of people who fight the good fight. The world building in this area is much more intense, and is probably more common, familiar fantasy ground for most of us. As for the science fiction aspect, the idea is that the free peoples have technology that's hidden from librarian-controlled land. So they have flying ships, crystals that give superhuman strength, giant robots, you know, that sort of technology.
Giant robots!
As you can see, it's a lot of ideas. And let's face it, sometimes stories can suffer from just having too many ideas. It's hard to categorize this type of story, and publishers certainly don't like it, but more on that later. But I've always enjoyed this series because it's such an ambitious concept to make a story this colorful. As an example, you know how many blockbuster movies these days just have no color in them? The saturation is turned down, everything's gray to make it look gritty and realistic. But then you have movies like Barbie, where everything's incredibly colourful and the saturation is cranked up to insane levels. Now, one style is not inherently superior to the other. The goal should be to match the colour palette to the story. But that is what we want in middle grade books, a saturated colour palette. Everything should be bright and colourful and dazzling. This style may not appeal to everyone, but if it's your thing, you'll find a lot to enjoy here. Moving on, this series has a magic system, like all Brandon Sanderson books. Now, even though this is a kids' book series, it still has some clever thought put into how the magic system works. Basically, there are two magic systems: talents and lenses. First, every member of the Smedry family has a talent, but in a clever bit of subverting expectations, all talents are kind of anticlimactic. They appear almost useless at first. For example, Grandpa Smedry's talent is to arrive late for everything. So yeah, it doesn't seem that helpful until we realize that every time someone shoots at Grandpa, he arrives late for the bullet.
How is that possible?
Yeah, suddenly it's very useful indeed. This is a fantastic magic system in my opinion because it perfectly suits a kid's book series. The talents all seem goofy at first, until we start trying to find clever ways to use them to our advantage. We have Smedrys whose talent is to trip over all the time, or get lost, or dance whenever they hear music. But then the characters, and us, the reader, have to start finding clever uses for this talent. Like all good hard magic systems, it's not about the power, it's about how cleverly you use it. The second magic system is the lenses, so people wear glasses or just a single monocle to unlock certain magical abilities. Some of them are pretty goofy too, and others are crazy powerful, but I'm going to keep this vague here so you can be surprised by them. The lenses allow for some incredible magical jewels of strategy and resourcefulness. Also, there's artwork in these books. Much of the plot lines in these books are about hunting for lenses that will help the Smedrys in their fight against the librarians. Still, before we go any further, we need to talk about a major feature of this series. There's a bunch of wacky, silly, and just goofy humour in these books. Sometimes it's just for laughs, but then other times it's major plot points that depend on pretty weird stuff. This silliness is a strong flavour that some readers will love, others will merely tolerate, and I think others will hate it. If you're familiar with Sanderson's other works, you might know that he occasionally writes the comedy character, so like Wit, Wayne, Shallan and her puns, and the Lopin. In some fan circles online, these characters will be deeply beloved or hated, and it depends on individual preferences. Well, in Alcatraz, basically everyone is a comedy character. It's great if you're into that. But the silliness in the story is not just an aesthetic choice of do you love it or do you hate it. It can actually be a problem. There are times when the story legitimately struggles to balance the silliness and the seriousness of the story. In my opinion, I think the first book has a lot of these balance issues. The second book improves on it a little bit more, and by the third book onwards, the story really does strike the perfect balance. Knights of Crystalia was the book that made me love this series as opposed to just liking it. But it does mean it's a rough start. In that sense, Alcatraz is very similar to Discworld. Sanderson has said many times that he's a big fan of Terry Pratchett. I saw one of Sanderson's live streams where someone asked him if he likes to read, and he answered that there's always at least one person in the Sanderson house reading Pratchett. And I'm sorry, I couldn't find that particular video. He just streams so much. My point is, you really can think of Alcatraz as being Sanderson's take on Discworld, just aimed slightly more towards middle grade. But Discworld also can have this problem of having silly plots and serious plots and struggling to find the balance. When it works, it's god-tier literature. When it doesn't work, it's painful. It's one of the reasons why Discworld improves as it goes on, because Pratchett developed the skill required to write this unique writing style. I think in many ways, Sanderson too also had to practice this tone a little bit before he truly caught lightning in a bottle. There's one other important piece of context for the silliness in Alcatraz. Sanderson wrote the first book way back in 2007, very early in his career. In fact, at the time, he had been planning to write the first Mistborn trilogy, writing 3 books back to back to back. But he quickly realized he couldn't spend so much time in one place with the same writing style without getting bored and stifling his creativity a bit. So he wrote Alcatraz as a chance to take a break. Yes, this guy's a beast who writes books for a break. But Alcatraz 1 has all the silliness that was missing from Mistborn Trilogy 1. They are total polar opposites in tone. Then as he went further into his career, he kept coming back to Alcatraz periodically to keep his writing fresh and fun. In that sense, this series is very much a creative outlet, but in the other sense, they are almost the total opposites of his regular work, tonally speaking. Still, I think I've explained that enough. I hope you now know what you're getting in for. Let's continue and look more at the story. It is a bit tricky to explain just what the plots are in such wild stories as these, but essentially they are adventure and mystery novels. Each book is an episodic adventure into a new fantasy location, going there to solve a big mystery and to fight the big evil villains. In fact, let me just give you a full overview. Book 1 is about a local library, which is in actual fact a huge labyrinth with traps and monsters. This book introduces many of the main concepts we see in the series. Book 2 is about the ancient library of Alexandria, like an Indiana Jones temple with skeletons and curses. Book 3 takes place in the Free Kingdom, so that's where we go into full high fantasy mode. The librarians have sent a diplomatic emissary, and Alcatraz doesn't trust them for a second. Book 4 is on the front lines of the war against the latest librarian invasion, so very action heavy, that one. Book 5 is an attempt by the Smedry line to infiltrate the top librarian headquarters, the Library of Congress. And Book 6 is an epic race across the world towards the final showdown. Now, of particular note is the final 2 books. The Dark Talent actually ends on a cliffhanger, and the final book changes narrator. Let me explain. Now, I said these books were written by Alcatraz to tell us in the Hushlands about the librarians. But the books were also written for the Free Kingdoms and the people there to tell them the truth about Alcatraz's adventures. Apparently, Alcatraz is considered a celebrity and a hero by his own people. But now in the books, he's trying to prove that he's not a good person. In fact, Book 1 starts with the opening line, "I am not a good person."
So he's a bad guy?
This whole series is a delightful example of an unreliable narrator. So, Book 5 ends on a cliffhanger because Alcatraz doesn't want to write any more books about what happened. Then in the final book, Bastille steps up and writes the final book in her voice. In fact, they even changed author to make it more believable. The final book is largely written by Jancy Patterson based on the outline that Sanderson set up. They did the exact same thing in the Skyward series with the 3 novellas that make up Skyward Flight. By the way, I made a video about that series too. So I think the change in style between books 5 and book 6 is quite noticeable, but it's also deliberate. It makes Bastille as a narrator stand out as distinct from Alcatraz. So think of the last 2 books more as a duology. Now moving on, all of these books are a standalone adventure, but there are a couple of plot threads that weave between them all. The first overarching plot is the mystery of Alcatraz's origin. Remember at the beginning of the series, he's a foster child growing up in the Hushlands. So why was a member of the famous Smedry family with their bizarre talents hidden away in librarian territory? This is a major ongoing thread for the series. A second big thread is the mystery behind the Smedry talents. So where did they all come from and why do they all work in this strange way? A third big thread is just the librarians themselves. So there are multiple orders within their organizations and they all have a different mode of operating. It's really fun to see the different types of enemies and their corresponding strategies changing over the course of the series. And one big mystery is about the narration itself. So why does Alcatraz believe he's no hero? Why does he have to write a story to set the record straight? It's a question that depends a lot on Alcatraz's character. So our 3 main characters are right here on the front cover of Book 1. So Alcatraz, Bastille, and Grandpa Leavenworth Smedry. Yeah, all named after prisons, or more accurately, the librarians named prisons after them as an act of propaganda.
What's propaganda?
So Alcatraz is an unreliable narrator as the one writing the book, but as a character, he's a very cynical person with dry humor and a sharp wit. In fact, he honestly reminds me a lot of Niles from Frasier, you know, reserved with his mannerisms, but pointed with his speech.
What an odd combination of odors. Smells like a fish died and all the other fish sent flowers.
Next to him is Bastille, who is aggressive and outspoken and willing to punch anything that stands in her way. The two of them make a good team and contrast each other very well. And Grandpa is wise but very scatterbrained and whimsical. He doesn't take things very seriously and thinks everything is a grand adventure. So the trio work very well at being distinct and memorable with chemistry between them. That said, the characterization is sort of dialed up to extremes. It's a lot like the world building, where all the genres and the ideas are crammed together. This is colourful characterization with high saturation. It's good for a kid's book and it makes every character stand out a little bit more, but it can be a little blunt and lack subtlety in places.
We don't have time for subtle.
Now you might be thinking, this sounds like a pretty good series overall. Why haven't I heard about it? Well, time to get into a big old conspiracy theory. The first book in the series was sold to Scholastic Press in 2007, and they absolutely butchered the publication. So Brandon Sanderson at the time was publishing his main books through Tor Books, but Tor mostly does adult fantasy. For whatever reason, and I couldn't find a hard factual statement on why this was done, the decision was made to try to use a middle grade publisher for this middle grade series. The problem was that Alcatraz is such a weird mishmash of genre that the publisher had no idea how to categorize it. So when the books were first released, they had these absolutely horrendous book covers. I mean, just look at these. I'm normally not that fussy about book covers, but these are just so offensively bad because they don't look like fantasy books at all. They look like detective novels or amateur sleuth books. In fact, they look like 90s book covers, more like the Animorphs, which is not what we're going for here. And Scholastic kept this artistic style on the covers all the way through. This is still how they are appearing on Goodreads. Eventually, in 2016, Sanderson actually had to pay out of pocket to buy back the publishing rights for this series. Then he sold them back to Tor, his mainline publisher, who re-released all these books with new covers. And truth be told, the Tor release in 2016, the covers are an improvement, but they're still not quite right. They look like comedy adventure books. They don't say fantasy. Plus, it's not clear from the main cover who the main character is. Finally, to promote the release of the sixth and final book in late 2022, the whole series got a redesign. Now they have genuinely good covers that actually communicate what the story is about. I mean, just look at the new cover. It's clearly urban fantasy. There's a prominent sword on the cover. The font has changed to fantasy font. Even the name Brandon Sanderson has a glow effect underneath to make it look magical. Like, it's just perfect for what the book actually is. So this series did not really have momentum building up behind it during its period of publication. It didn't grow in popularity, instead fizzling in obscurity. I'm glad that it is at least available now in an appropriate form, although I still think it deserves better recognition for just how good it is. Now, I've always liked that there are lots of women in Sanderson's books, and this series is no exception. Bastille is an amazing leading woman with personality and determination. There's also a lot of girls as side characters and as villains too.
You know, monsters can be women too.
There's lots of people of color and real-world races here too. In fact, the story spends a lot of time in fantasy countries that are based off real places. For example, one character, Sing Smedry, is from the fictional land of Mokia, but Mokia is actually based on Hawaiian Polynesian culture. The idea being that Hawaii was a piece of Mokia that the librarians conquered. So there are several other fantasy countries in this world that are adjacent to real-world people and places. There is no queer presence in this series, but there is a ton of depictions of mental health, which is common for a lot of Sanderson books. Kids talk a lot about grief, shame, low self-esteem, self-doubt, all sorts of things that are common topics for this age group. And just like with Stormlight Archive, Sanderson deals with all of these things with a lot of beauty and heart, so this series really can be inspiring at times. For the content warning, there is virtually no content warning here. This is as kid-friendly as it gets. I mean, sometimes people shoot guns or punch bad guys, so a bit of stylized action violence, but nothing for the most of the series. I do think there is only some serious content in book 5. The Dark Talent is the darkest of these 6 books, but even then, the story sort of skims over all the scary bits and alludes to them without going into great detail, so keeping it family-friendly. Is the ending worth it? So, avoiding spoilers here, I think the ending is worth it for the most part. There's just 3 little things to consider. First, the final book is quite different in style, as we talked about earlier. 2, there's just a little bit of anticlimax to the end. The final book is the shortest of them all, and a few of the big things are abrupt. And third, it's not a perfectly happy ending. One of the themes in this book, and with the narrator style, is that heroes are real people who make real mistakes. And I think the ending of the series reflects that in a powerful way. It's an imperfect ending, bittersweet in some ways, and I think that's important for kids to see. If you're okay with all of that, then yes, the ending is worth it. And how much should you try? Well, this one's a little bit tricky, because I think that the first book is probably the weakest out of the 6. It's still a good book, but it struggles to balance the seriousness and the silliness. Book 2 is a step up, and book 3 onwards is where it just strikes gold. I think overall the series is a very ambitious idea. A kids' book series with an unreliable narrator, and multiple genres, and a ton of humour and magic systems, all rolled up into one big kaleidoscope of action. There's a lot going on here, so I think it's fair that it took maybe a little bit of practice for the concept to fully work. But this is still one of my favourite middle grade series ever, and I hope I've convinced more of you to give this series the attention it deserves. So good luck and happy reading. Thanks for watching. Guys, if you want to support my work, please check out my own books, The Immortal Investigations. Now, these books are not for kids, there's sex and violence, but also monsters, magic, and mystery. I hope you'll check them out. I also have an online store for merch and book-related accessories, and a Patreon where you can vote on my content. Subscribe for more book reviews like this one, and let me know what other kids' book series you would like to see me talk about, or just adult series, it's cool. I'm very open to recommendations. So I'll see you next time, and I hope you enjoy a good book today. Bye!